Please welcome to the stage Jyoti Menon, President of the Alumni Association of Barnard College.
Hi everyone, I'm Jyoti Menon, proud class of 2001 and President of the Alumni Association. And hopefully all of you have been having a fantastic morning. I was in some of the sessions and definitely heard a lot of good conversation, a lot of great questions. So I'm really excited to be here, even more excited to introduce our speaker this afternoon, who really doesn't need much of an introduction, but I think it's just, good to remind ourselves of who we have at the helm here at Barnard. So it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome President Sian Beilock, who joined Barnard in July of 2017, and she is one of the world's leading experts on the cognitive scientists behind choking under pressure and performance anxiety, with a focus on math and science for women and girls. She is the author of 2 critically acclaimed books, Choke and How the Body Knows Its Mind. And her 2018 TED Talk has been viewed over 2 million times. We are so incredibly proud and happy to have her leading Barnard, so please join me in welcoming President Sian Beilock to the stage.
Thank you, Jyoti, and it's so wonderful to be here today. I hope you've enjoyed your day so far. How has it been? It's been good? Yeah. I asked the table over here if they've learned anything, and one alum said that she was going to check her notes, which I thought was a very Barnard answer, that you were taking notes. It's really wonderful to be here as I start my 3rd year, which is incredible. It's the 3rd year. But one thing that I can say is that I've learned how important our alumni are to the college. Our students come here in large part because of the women that have come before them. They see what you've done. They see how alums give back in terms of their time, they're helping find jobs, make connections. They really see the family that Barnard is. And so I want to thank you for being here, for being ambassadors of the college. You really are the heart of what we're doing here. And what we've really come to talk about in the last several years is how special it is to be part of the Barnard family. There's absolutely no place in the world like it. And I talked to a group of alums last night. I think it's worth repeating now. Barnard is singular. That's it. There's no one in our stratosphere, in the country or in the world. And I think that singular point is really important. There's no other institution that combines a focus on empowering women with the best and absolute best faculty in the world who are winning Pulitzers and big scientific grants, but are so devoted to working closely with our students. You've got this tight-knit community that is Barnard with the shared academics of Columbia, and then you have the best campus in the world, New York City. You put that together, there is no combination. It's the best of all worlds, and we are truly equipping our young women with the tools to go out there and change the world. And I think that message is powerful. Why Barnard? There's nothing like it. And we're surely seeing that in terms of our applications. I think it's really important to remind ourselves about how wanted Barnard is as a place to go to school. I talk about it right now as being really hot. I don't know how else to describe it. Our applications went up 18% last year. Our applications, it's great. Maybe not if you're in the admissions office, but everywhere else. Our applications are going up over the last several years at a rate that is 2.5 times as fast as the Ivies. We had 9,300 applications for just over 600 spots last year. It makes us one of the most selective of any college or university in the country. And what that speaks to is the power of Barnard, that our students, that young women see the power of coming into a place where they can work hard, be supported by those around them, and learn from others, express different views, and go off to change the world. It's just so exciting. Something else that, yes, it's exciting. Something else that I think is important is that as we are moving up in terms of the interest in Barnard. We're staying true to our ideology of being a place that brings young women together from diverse backgrounds, different experiences. We have always scored really highly on any assessment of social mobility, which means bringing young women in who might come from lower income backgrounds and helping push them up to higher income backgrounds. And we continue to push that diversity today, both in terms of ethnicity, in terms of religious background, and in terms of socioeconomic status. And the way that we do that is by being need blind in our admissions. We don't look at financial need when students apply and when we think about admissions, and we meet full financial need, which means that our students come out who are on aid with minimal loans. About 50% of our students receive some form of support, and the average debt for students who are on aid graduating last year was $16,500. That's it. That's it. We work very hard to keep that low. Okay, so you might ask, how do we do that? At most institutions, financial aid is covered 100% by the endowment. At Barnard, we spend over $40 million a year on financial aid, and it's only covered $8 million from the endowment. One of the things about Barnard is that even though we're competing in this stratosphere that is so amazing, is that we didn't really start paying attention to our endowment until 1983 when Columbia went co-ed. So we're behind the curve a little bit in getting it up there, which means that it's so important what we do in terms of raising funds to help push this idea that we are bringing the best and brightest young women to campus regardless of their ability to pay. And pushing this idea that we are paying it forward. Many of you I know came in on financial aid, and the idea that you can help the next generation in the same way I think is really, really powerful. And so I think it is true that it takes a village here. For Barnard to compete at the level it is, for Barnard to be the type of place it is, we have to reach deep in terms of how we support the college, in terms of what we do, what we give, because everything matters here. And I can tell you we are really, really, really good stewards of those resources. I talk a lot about how we punch way above our weight. We work hard here, we do a lot with little, and we're working really hard to make it even more broad. One thing that I know you've heard about today that we're really talking a lot about is participation. Our participation rate does not match the experiences people say they have at Barnard. Over the country, participation rate has been going down. I'm pleased to say in the last year we've turned it around, but we've gone from 21 to 22%, whereas many of our peers are at 50% participation. And the point here is that it doesn't matter what level. Giving at any level is a sign that you believe in the mission of what's happening at Barnard and why it's so important. And so I ask you, as you're working, as you're volunteering, all the work you do, to get that out there, that it is a sign that people believe in what we're doing here. And I can't think of a more important time than to believe in bringing the best, diverse young women to the table and giving them the tools to go out and change the world. There's never been a more important time to do that, I would argue. So I thought I'd spend the rest of the time here telling you a little bit about some of the initiatives that we've launched to help support students and alums as they go out in that endeavor. I know you heard this morning about one of our new initiatives that got launched last year called Beyond Barnard, but I just want to tell you a little bit more about it because I think it's so powerful and a fantastic way to connect alumni and students, and a fantastic way to really exemplify this idea that Barnard is pushing about being part of a lifelong family, that it's not just about your 4 years here, it's about the connection that stays many, many years into the future. So Beyond Barnard was founded on this idea that your major does not dictate your career path, which so many of us know, and also on the idea that you shouldn't have to know what you want to do to go get help. Usually at college and universities, you have to know, I'm interested in finance, so I go to this office, or I'm interested in law school, or I go to that office, or med school in this office. And we firmly believe that our students may not know where they want to go, what the opportunities are. And so we blew up how we did career advising. We took all these different offices, we put them in one place, and we said, this is the place to go for a one-stop shop, to figure out what's your first internship, what's your first fellowship. If you come from a family that maybe doesn't have connections that other students do, what does it mean to interview for a job? How do you network? All of those things, Barnard needs to be that family. And I can say it's been very successful. In our first year, we had over 4,000 individual advising appointments, and a quarter of those were with alums. So not only do we serve students, but we serve alums. A big group is within 5 years out, maybe students interested in going back to law school or medical school. But we also serve alums across the lifespan. And I've talked to a couple people here, and we're really interested in thinking about how Beyond Barnard can be part and lead the conversation for women coming back into the workforce, for helping women think about different career paths, thinking about transitions. We had an alum in her, I believe in her 70s, who was doing her LinkedIn profile, which we thought was just fantastic. This is a place we want you to come back to connect with, both to help our students, but also to connect for yourself. And I think it's just really an exciting endeavor. We got written up last year in the New York Times as one of the new models of career advising. We're really leading the way here in a conversation about how to help students and our alums develop the kinds of tools and skills that are going to take them into the next jobs and the jobs of the future. And what I talk a lot about here is that at Barnard, what we're doing is we're teaching students how to think. We're not teaching them what to think, we're teaching them how to think. That's a really important distinction. And the ability to write, to think critically with data, to communicate, to think from cultural and historical perspectives are what's going to carry you into any job that you decide to take. And it's this false idea that you need one set of skills to go into finance or data and another set of skills to work in government or nonprofit. It's a lot of the same skill set, and that's really what we're teaching at Barnard. We're really excited about this initiative. I invite you to sign up to be a mentor, to sign up to even be in residence for an hour or half a day to talk about what you've done. If you have internships, we'd love to have you support our students. We're really pushing to raise funds for paid internships, especially because we want to make sure that no student is deprived an internship because she might have to work or bring in money as part of what she's doing on campus. It's a really exciting place to be, and we look forward to working with alums to think about what Beyond Barnard means into the future. I'll also mention that we're not only focused on students taking that step after college, we're also focused a lot on how students are feeling on campus. I talked in my convocation speech about a new initiative that we launched this year called Feel Well, Do Well at Barnard. And it really was under the guise that our students are amazing. Our young women work very hard, they push, they really come equipped to have an effect on the world. But with that intensity often comes anxiety. It often comes a lack of knowledge about how to take care of yourself. Sometimes these students are living on their own for the first time. How do you think about sleeping and eating, stress management? How do you really learn how to design your life? And so we decided we wanted to take the conversation about health and wellness outside of the health center, outside of the counseling center, and make sure that conversation was happening across campus. And that's what Feel Well, Do Well at Barnard is about. It's this idea that health and wellness is all of our responsibility, that how we potentially as alum reflect how you take care of yourself is something that you can teach and work with the students, that the staff really are often the first line with the students, the faculty, how wellness is brought into the classroom. It's something we're really excited about, and we're really going to be talking a lot about it this year. So you'll see videos, you'll see events on campus. The idea is that health and wellness is everywhere, and being excellent in the classroom is not just about what happens in the classroom. It's about what happens outside the classroom. It's about how you take care of yourself. And we often know that women tend to put themselves last after everyone else, their work, their families. How can we teach this generation to think about their mental health, their wellness and vitality in a way that will help them in college and will last a lifetime? So we're very excited about that. We'll be having some events that involve alums and students throughout the years. And it's really something that it will be just a basic conversation on our campus. We know that we are preparing amazing students to go out there and have an effect, and we need to make sure that we're preparing them to take care of themselves as well. It's something that not all colleges and universities are talking about, but it's something that we think is so important for the success of Barnard women. Finally, I'll say that we're really focusing academically on making sure that our students have a very well-rounded education. We have a new curriculum now that's 4 years old, so maybe not so new. But one unique thing about this curriculum is that it pushes students to take classes across the arts and sciences. I say it's not the liberal arts and sciences. Sciences is part of the liberal arts, and our curriculum reflects that. Students do an entire and intense year of writing, as many of you I know in this room did, but they now all have to take classes that push them to think computationally and digitally, that push them to think empirically with data, that push them to think historically. It is so important that everyone has computational tools, and now not just for our graduates in math and science, but our graduates across the board. But I'm pleased to say that we have now a third of our graduates graduating in STEM disciplines, and many of them are going off to great medical graduate schools. And our students who graduate in English and history, often they have computational backgrounds, as an example, and go into fields where computation is needed as well. So the idea is that, again, we're giving our students the ability to think across these disciplines in a really interesting and exciting way. And finally, I'll say that our relationship with Columbia has never been better. I think for a while, at least this is my historical assessment, and I know you will all correct me, but when there was the question about whether Barnard was going to go into Columbia as the way Radcliffe did with Harvard, there was really sort of a push when the decision, the best decision I think in the world, was made to stay separate, a push away from Columbia, to establish our independence, to really work to establish who we are. Now we are so strong. As you know, Barnard students take classes at Columbia. More students at Columbia take classes at Barnard. Our faculty are hired and tenured at Columbia. We are attracting the best and brightest at the student and faculty level, and Columbia sees the benefit of Barnard just as Barnard benefits from Columbia. We have athletes playing on the Columbia teams. We have faculty who work on both sides of the street, and we have several new 5-year programs where our students get both a bachelor's at Barnard and a master's at Columbia in 5 rather than 6 years. We're very excited about these programs. They're called 4+1 programs, and they are open only to Barnard students in the Columbia professional schools. We have one in engineering that we started, public health, international relations, statistics, and we're working on more in social work, in nursing, potentially with education. And the idea is that these professional schools want our women. And so they've developed these relationships where students are admitted in an express way without GRE scores. We're working on funding to help support students in that 5th year. And as an undergraduate degree becomes more ubiquitous, having that master's option is really exciting. And this is a great example of how Columbia is turning to Barnard for the best and brightest talent. We're also working on connections with the law school and the business school, and we're just so excited about where we're going. So I would say that you can rest assured that Barnard is stronger than ever, and that we surely benefit from what's happening at Columbia, but they see the benefit of what it means to have Barnard as part of the community. It's an exciting time to be here. I thank you all so much for being ambassadors of the college. You're going to hear more about some of what we're doing to think about how we ensure diverse perspectives on campus with our new and inaugural hire, our Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Ariana Gonzalez-Stokas, who's sitting over here. You're going to hear more about some of the initiatives we're pushing forward. If you're ever worried about what's happening in the world, just walk on campus. Those worries will go down. Our students are going to go out there and push boundaries. They already are. And with your support, we can do what we need to do to make this world just an exceptionally better place. So thank you so much for being here, for being ambassadors. And I'm happy to take some questions if you have them.
Hi. I guess 2 thoughts. One, what have you learned the most over your past, 2 going on 3 years here? What was the thing that most surprised you about coming into this role and sort of thriving in it. But also how every president has their own initiatives. How are you integrating Beyond Barnard and the initiatives that you're launching with initiatives that have been long-standing at the college?
Those are great questions. So the first question was, what surprised me most about coming to Barnard? And this one is actually really easy to answer. I was actually really surprised about how much we do on such little funds. I mean, we are competing against the Ivies for our students. We are competing against the best colleges and universities in the country for our faculty. We are doing this in a completely different financial realm than everyone else. And so the need for support, for really talking about giving in a way we hadn't done before, for talking about what a great return on value it is for your investment, it really came to the forefront for me. So, it's not something that we're bragging about our endowment size outside, but for those who are in the know, to be able to do what we do on the size of our endowment takes a lot of hard work every day, and it takes people contributing to the annual fund, giving those gifts every year, because that's what's allowing us to be need blind in our admissions and push in the way we are. But we're working to correct that. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that we just started later in terms of thinking about where we were going there. In terms of how we're integrating some of these new initiatives into what's happened at Barnard before, I will say that one of the most important things I did over the last few years is listen and learn. And everything that's come out is really a growth of what's already happened at the college. So Beyond Barnard was a great way to bring different offices together, but we didn't create a lot of new offices in doing that. We just centralized everything in a way that gave students a clear one-stop shop for where to go. We have a new director for our Athena Center now, Breen Bhatti, who's an alum and on campus, and we're really excited for how the Athena Center for Leadership will integrate with Beyond Barnard as it goes into its next iteration, and so that's an example there. Even health and wellness and everything we're pushing in that way wasn't new. 80% of our students use the Furman Counseling Center. That's a staggering number that they go for the free appointments. Each of our students have free counseling sessions they can use, and if they need longer term care, we help integrate them in the community. This is a place where the stigma around talking to someone is very low, which is exactly what we want. And so building on that, we were able to say, hey, how do we even augment this even more? How do we make this even better? And so I would say that everything we're doing here is not something brand new for Barnard. It's essentially taking the ingredients that were there and elevating them, which is really exciting. And what I think, is the point of a leader, is to see an institution, to see what the pulse is, the beat is, and think about where we can push in particular areas.
Are you currently teaching? And if not, what would you like to teach? Probably in a seminar form.
So I'm not teaching right now. There's only so many hours in the day. But I will tell you that at the beginning of every year, when students come to campus as first years, they participate in a program called Barnard Reads. This is a relatively recent program where faculty and staff across the college take a group of students and talk to them about either a work of art or a book or something in their area and teach a master class, basically. And I've done that for the last 3 years since I've been here, and I've taught one of my papers that was published in Science with a Barnard alum, actually, who did her PhD with me at the University of Chicago. And so it's about our research looking at the impact of parents, especially with young girls, not just doing bedtime reading, which a lot of us have done with our kids, but what if they did bedtime math? And we show that there's a really great impact of doing bedtime math with your kids in terms of their math aptitude. If you want to find bedtime math for yourself or your grandkids or anyone else, it's free. It's on iTunes and Android. It's an app. And so I teach a class with the paper, and we read this paper and we talk about it, and it's so fantastic to be able to say that one of someone in your seat might be an author on a paper like this someday, and you get your start here working in a lab. And I said the biggest thing I want to say about this graduate student who went to Barnard is that out of the close to 20 some odd students that I've advised as graduate student mentors, she was by far the best writer. Now, I don't know if she came into Barnard that way, but my hypothesis is that there was a causal aspect to the intense writing that happens at Barnard.
Hi, I'm Catherine Brewster, class of 1971. And my question is about the emotional intelligence part of our being. I'm really excited about the Beyond Barnard endeavor and all of the intellectual initiatives and the Be Well.
The feel well, do well.
Feel well, do well. So what I'm curious about, because it's more and more a part of conversation, is our emotional intelligence, and where is Barnard, and what thoughts are you having around addressing that part of students and bringing that, any new initiatives around it?
Yeah, I think this idea that how we interact, people can define emotional intelligence in different ways, but I'll tell you what I think it means. This ability to interact with others, to talk across differences, to understand that different people have different lived experiences and they bring that to the table, to understand that how a student feels about what they're learning in class could very well be reflective of whether they see themselves in any of the works being taught and whether they can relate to the professor. And so I think that comes and is written throughout everything we're doing. It's certainly true in Beyond Barnard, where they're working on a new workshop, actually with Vice President Stokas, about how you translate how you feel at Barnard into being in the first workplace environment. How do you address things where you see inequalities? What does it mean to speak up? How do you do that? How do you take this seamless transition? So making things that maybe we all just took for granted as implicit and making them very explicit. Another example is how you network. We often don't teach that, and we really don't teach it for women. And as we provide internships, being very clear, you need to decide who the 3 people are that you're going to ask for coffee, and then ask them after you leave if you can send them an update email every 3 or 6 months. They don't have to reply, but these are the people that are forging the foundation of everything you're going to do from now on. And it's your responsibility to keep in touch with them and make those connections here and think about how it goes on. Making a lot of that very explicit, I think, is really important. And then, of course, through our health and wellness initiatives, we're doing a lot in that respect in terms of learning how to manage your own anxiety. That self-doubt is something that oftentimes women feel in particular situations, and one of the reasons is because when you're in a situation where you've been historically excluded, that can have an extra burden on you. It's true for women, it's especially true for women of color. How do we manage those anxieties? How do we recognize that it's something that a lot of us have? How do we have self-compassion for ourselves? Because we're often much nicer to the people around us than we are to ourselves, right? Some of the things that you say to yourself, you would never say those to your friends. So how do we talk about that and be explicit about it in a way? And that's one of the best things about being at a place that's focused on gender and women, is that we can have those conversations really explicitly. And I think it's something that's so special about Barnard. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing more of you on campus, and thank you for really being a part of Barnard. It means so much to us, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to make this school such a fantastic place. Thank you.
So thank you again, President Beilock, for all your remarks. I know everyone loves to hear from you. I know I do. And every time I hear you say liberal arts, it's not liberal arts and science. I feel like I've learned that very clearly from you. And the other thing I tend to repeat a lot is the idea of Barnard really being a singular place. And I see that all the time when I'm here. And I can definitely tell you, coming to Barnard after any crazy day at work makes me incredibly happy. So hopefully it does the same for all of you and are really enjoying your day. I do want to just take this opportunity, because I know a lot of people may scatter after different events, is first of all thank the leadership planning committee basically for the day, because without them this wouldn't happen. So Hillary and your team, day done. And You'll probably hear me thank them again, but I want to make sure in this bigger group where we probably have most people of the day, I want to do that. And I also want to thank Karen and Kelly and the office who really makes everything happen here at Barnard for us. So thank you so much. That was off script. Sorry, guys. But really, I'm here to actually help us all have a conversation with Ariana Gonzalez-Stocas, our new and inaugural Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I have our bio here, and we often joke that we get like really long bios to read, but I think it's really important for us to learn about who's here and who's leading this college. And so you're going to see me do a lot more reading because I do want to make sure I say it right, and I think it's the first time that all of us are meeting her. So it'll maybe be longer than usual, but I think it's worth it, and really understanding all the great work that she's done and what she's going to bring here. I was recently at an event listening to a panel, and someone very much so made this case that we should really be taking the time to be reading people's bios because of the experience that they bring that we should understand. So I will do that. So bear with me, but hopefully you'll be as impressed as I am. So Ariana Gonzalez-Stocas joined Barnard in July of 2019. So as one would always joke, I'm sure she's an expert on all things Barnard. As the inaugural Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, she has a BA in Philosophy and Studio Arts from Bard College. There was a moment I paused. I'm like, was that supposed to be Barnard? But no, alas. But she did come to the Columbia family, where she has a PhD in Philosophy and Education from Teachers College. Her doctoral research examined the intersections of aesthetics, education, and inequality. Her current research investigates reparative epistemologies in universities and the role of social movement pedagogy from Latin America and the Caribbean in, quote, inventing school. She is a co-investigator on the Mellon subgrant, Critical Theory in the Global South, and was the project director for Illumina Rockefeller Grant at Bard to cultivate racial equity through revealing suppressed local histories. Prior to Barnard, Gonzalez-Stocas served as the inaugural Dean of Inclusive Excellence at Bard College in New York. While there, she was instrumental in identifying working groups to establish a clear and strategic vision for Pell-eligible and DACA students. She also supported the development and institutionalization of student-initiated projects, symbolic reparation projects such as signage to commemorate suppressed histories, and created, along with a team of faculty, staff, and students, Gilson Place for interracial and intercultural dialogue. Prior to a role at Bard, she was an assistant professor of interdisciplinary studies at Gutman Community College of the City of New York, where she was a founding faculty member. Her professional affiliations include the American Philosophical Association, the Caribbean Studies Association, the Philosophy of Education Society, the Latin American Philosophy of Education Society, the Caribbean Philosophical Association, and the American Educational Research Association. Ariana brings a wealth of experience to Barnard as a committed educator and researcher. She has worked as an administrator, faculty member, and scholar of philosophy and education, with a proven track record of being dedicated to equity and access. She lives in Manhattan with her husband, Jacob, and their 4-year-old daughter, Adalia. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage. Well, first of all, I hope everyone was just as impressed as I was with her background, and I think she'll do wonderful things. So thank you for coming to Barnard. We're excited to have you. Obviously we'll have questions and we'll have a conversation, but I think what people would love to hear is what we should know about you that maybe is not on this incredible bio of yours.
Well, it's really nice to be here today, and I'm very much looking forward to connecting more with the amazing graduates of Barnard. I think before I kind of get to your answer, one thing I've noticed about Barnard since I've been here is that a lot of places talk about creating leaders. Barnard really does it. And not in the sense that everybody's kind of the leader of this organization or that, but there's something about the spirit of this place that it's hard to name it. It's got a really particular essence to it. And I think that's really special, and it's been a remarkable 3 months, really getting to know it. So I guess in addition to what that very long bio talked about, is I can just expand a little bit on it and talk about how what you heard informs how I approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that for me, this work, it's theory and practice, and also personal. So I think for myself, there's a personal narrative around access to education that's come from my own family's history, around the need to begin to figure out the pathways of access, particularly into highly resourced educational environments. That isn't always easy in the United States. Ability, I think, as our president always says, often outstrips opportunity. And I think that that's something that I think about all the time. So I approach this work through a deep engagement with philosophy and educational theory, and it's a career and a field that changes rapidly. So the research part of it is really important. It's important for me to continue to stay thinking about, the most cutting-edge research on topics like implicit bias and conscious bias, where the field is changing rapidly, and so are the recommendations. So I come at this work with that perspective. I think I know I'm highly creative. I like starting things. I like building things. So my 3 previous positions, as you heard, were inaugural positions. So I bring that to the table. And I think another thing that I find really important is that this work is systemic work. So it's work that requires someone to look at how systems flow or don't flow, how well they work in the pursuit of equity, how difference enters a system like a university, and then how that system begins to change to facilitate inclusion of that difference. So I think a lot about that systemic approach, and that's what I've spent a lot of time really listening and thinking about since I started. And the graduates of Barnard are part of that system. So how the graduates feed back into what goes on here and what goes on in terms of the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion and the direction that it takes, because it needs to be a collaborative endeavor. So I see a very central part of my work as being a connector and a collaborator, because it's not just what I know about the research and the theory, but it's also what Barnard is and what Barnard needs and what people desire it to be.
Great, thank you. So President Beilock spoke a little bit about feel well, do well here at Barnard. And sort of have 2 questions around that. I think the first is really, would love to hear more about, what kind of programming will be available to students and how that may engage our alumni as well. And I think the second question is, how do you really think about the vision for that program, knowing you're maybe about a few months in, but how do you think about that, and how do you think about it growing over time?
Sure. So Feel Well, Do Well is, MJ Murphy and Mary Comerford out of Furman Counseling and the Health Services are really kind of the driving force behind it, and I'm partnering and working closely with them. And I think, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the basic structure. I'm not sure how much you've already heard about it. But essentially, in addition to the services that this campus already offers pretty robustly, which is the Furman Counseling Center, Health Services, Well Women, there are those services, but also really it's how we take an approach to broad-based institutional involvement of student well-being. And this also includes how we really begin to think about well-being as an ecosystem. So, we met yesterday with staff for the all-staff meeting and talked a little bit about helping them to think about ways that they can become models for well-being as they encounter students within the space. Many staff work very closely with students. So how do they model well-being? How do they practice it? How do they speak with students? One of the programs that's rolled out through Feel Well, Do Well are trainings that are happening on sort of the very kind of basic for facility staff, for instance, on what to do and what resources exist if you see a student who might be in distress or who might be struggling in some way. So there's that side of the initiative, or that part of the initiative. I think the aim of Feel Well, Do Well is that everywhere a student turns in the institution, they're learning something about what well-being is like, and the very multifaceted version of what well-being is. The tagline of Feel Well, Do Well is your wellness your way, because it's important that students and all of us have a very diverse and broad picture of well-being practices. So the other part of this initiative that I'm working with MJ and Mary and faculty on is how we begin to think about the place of well-being within the classroom. And Sion, or President Beilock, touched on that a little bit in the beginning in her remarks, in that when a student in the classroom experiences a sense of marginalization or experiences difficulty accessing the full resources of the course, books, study abroad, for instance, that exerts a tremendous amount of pressure and stress, additional pressure and stress that might not be there if we were talking more intentionally about those experiences in the classroom. So we're working right now to launch that part. There's an internal phase that we're in, which is really talking with faculty to help get their perspectives and insight on how this work can go on in the classroom.
Great, thank you. You know, another big topic that's quite common on campus and obviously in different places is how do we address disparities across campus for students, especially those with non-dominant identities, and how do you really think about that specifically to Barnard and what we can and could be doing here, or maybe are doing already?
So I think, you know, one thing that I've been building on, which has already had momentum, is really thinking about first generation, low income, and I'd say like Pell eligible middle income families that enter from a broad range of, you know, racial, ethnic, religious identities. When a student enters Barnard, we want to make sure that they have an ability to fully access everything that the college has to offer without too much additional burden or stress. And that goes to this broad notion of what we're calling Access Barnard. So right now, what we're trying to do is begin to consolidate the efforts that already exist, because there are many efforts institutionally that exist to help address supplemental funding, book funding. There's lots of pockets of really good work, but what we're trying to do is begin to knit that all together in a way that I think Beyond Barnard is a really great example of and is done really successfully. So that when the student comes into the institution and perhaps they encounter a moment where they started the semester and they realize they need an extra $1,000 for this type of experience or supplies for a class, there's a single place that they can go to seek that support. And that we can also build support for things. I've spent a good amount of time in the archives really thinking a lot about the history of Barnard, reading testimonials. And one thing that really has stood out to me is that students express not feeling as if they belong at Barnard, not only because of Barnard, but because they can't access New York City. And that was sort of an interesting, for me, it was an interesting piece to discover that students who didn't have the opportunity, ability, or time to go out into New York City really felt as if it took away something about belonging. So how can we build more resources for students to have that full experience and not leave their 4 years here and have gone to Central Park never, or never gone to the Met? Kind of those experiences that are important to, I think, the identity and full experience of the college. So that's kind of one example of seeking to connect and systematize and create not just programs, but an actual place and system that is serving a underrepresented group on campus.
Great. So as you can see, we limited questions amongst ourselves because we know that Barnard alumni are not the shy type. So want to make sure we do two things. One is see if you have any questions, but also to see if you may have any suggestions or perspectives from what you've seen that maybe may help Ariana as she's getting up to speed here at Barnard. So I'll go ahead and open it up and we'll try.
Hello and welcome. I'm very excited to have you, and I know I'm not the only one. And so I'm Elise Fabrica, class of 2012. For anyone who can't see me, I won't stand up because I'm really tall. And chair of the Young Alum Committee, which is what my question is about. How do you see alums fitting in to your new very important position, and especially as the chair of the Young Alum Committee, and I think the young alums are a very unique cohort in the support we can offer current students. What can I do and what can we do to help?
I think that, so there's a couple of ideas. And of course, I think this is a great forum because I really want to hear your ideas. All of you have been through the complete kind of trajectory of Barnard. And you've gone from Barnard out into various life experiences and the workforce. One thing President Beilock mentioned is I'm working with Beyond Barnard to really think about how can we create opportunities that, training workshops that prepare students to go out into the workforce. And they're in an environment here which is incredibly nurturing, I think. And sometimes there's the reality of going into that workplace environment where you are the one of the one. And how do we prepare our students with the kind of resiliency and skills to know how to have those first encounters that they probably, unfortunately, may have around negotiating for pay or around being looked over for promotion. And I think the alums, particularly the more recent ones, are in the midst of figuring all those things out. And I think current students always need to hear that your first job or your first couple of jobs is not necessarily the career you'll have. I always tell students that my first job was entering data in a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I realized that was not for me. So I think they need to hear that perspective, and also the kind of skill sets that you've already begun to develop professionally around negotiating and navigating difference or navigating underrepresentation within the workplace. And I think other things around balancing, if you decide to have a family, you decide to have children, the complexity of managing those things together. And I think current students need to see examples of, they just want to know how it's done and what's possible. And I think that holds true for all of our students. So I think, the logical is sort of mentoring, but a kind of very specific sort of mentoring.
I don't know how many people here saw a movie called Animal House. Did anyone see this movie? Well, I don't know if anybody remembers, but there was this one part where the boys went on a road trip, and they went to this school called Emily Dickinson College. Does anybody remember this? And so all the young ladies were sort of represented as sort of these eggheads, strange women who were, mentally engaged and not socially engaged. Well, what I'm trying to say is that after graduating and being in the workforce, I was in the position to mentor a number of other women, not Barnard graduates. And there's really no easy way to say this. I had to teach them about their image. I had to teach them about what do you wear when you go on an interview. How are you going to look when you walk into the room and say, I no longer wish to be a secretary, I want to be promoted. I'm talking about college grads, but I'm just saying the image element. And I believe throughout my career that I have seen a similar situation. So I believe that that is a part of it. I think that is a part of transitioning from, I was a postdoc at West Virginia University, and all of our graduate, the majority of students at WVU were first generation college. They had no tradition to look back on, nobody to tell them, how to behave once they graduated. And my experience so what I'm saying is image to me is important, and I think it is one of the elements that helps us. We don't want to be, homogenized, but at the same time, at a certain level, I believe that there is some kind of a bar that will exclude you if you do not know the code word to get in the door. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think that, there's something really important about the subtlety of cultural codes, and clothing is one of those things, right? So I think one of the most powerful things I'll just speak personally. I learned from my family, from my mother in particular, was you have to learn to read all of those kinds of codes. They're like rhetorical modes, right? So how you begin to kind of enter different sorts of spaces and realize there actually are different ways of, for instance, dressing that and presentation that track onto those environments. Like in the professoriate, for instance, in some environments, if you show up in a three-piece suit, people will read you in a particular way, depending on the kind of institution it is, right? So there's like a subtlety and a cultural skill set that I think comes with that. I know that Beyond Barnard actually does a great deal around this and begins to have conversations. There's a closet for students who don't have access to clothing and attire for interviews, but also along with that, conversations around self-presentation. But that I think there's a lot of good writing right now around the importance of authenticity, of knowing how to authentically present yourself. Because we all know, if we can all think back to some of our first interviews or where we bought that kind of jacket that wasn't really comfortable, and that came through in the interview because you weren't comfortable with who you were. So I think it's also connected to this like development of your sense of self. Who are you? And how do you convey who you are? And that also kind of tracks on to finding the particular industry or job that tracks with that you'll feel comfortable in and you know that you have a lot to offer there. So I think it's about coming into the self, which is really important, a really important part of the work, and that all of us do that differently. There is a different track to that.
It's funny you say that about the clothing. I've had mentees, actually through Beyond Barnard, who've actually texted me a photo of themselves deciding what to wear to their first day of work. And often one of my first questions is, are you comfortable? Right? And it's think about the crazy air conditioning. Are you wearing something where you can take your jacket on or off? Or if you're going to an after work thing. So it's really a true, it's a great point. We face that all the time.
I'd say in the more practice you have, the more comfortable you get, right?
Yeah,
like there is that thing about practice that matters.
It's true.
I'm Glinda Smiley, class of 2009. There's been a growth in experiential learning and community-based learning, and I'm wondering how Barnard could, capitalize on that growth to get more women from diverse sectors to come here and speak, so that the mentoring is not only coming from our alumni, but from the breadth of knowledge of the type of women who are attracted to a city like New York and leading across sectors.
You can take that. From what I know, again, I'm not going to harp on Beyond Barnard, but I think that's experiential education is one significant pillar of what's going on in Beyond Barnard. So there's the kind of experiential education of, drawing people and, experts into the institution from a broad range for talks. The Athena Center, I know, is doing, and we're planning to do more of these kind of power talks, has been something that they've done for a long time. So there's different pockets that do this in the institution. And then there's the experiential learning that's going on. That's work study funds are now, you can use work study funds with certain community-based organizations to go work. If you want to work locally and work in an organization, instead of having to volunteer your time, you can find a way to get paid through that experiential ed. But in addition to that, Barnard's just received a very large grant from the Mellon Foundation for $1 million to build out these what's called engaged pedagogy courses. So it's called Barnard Engages. And these are some amazing courses that are already happening at Barnard. So the Mississippi semester, Seeking Asylum is another one where students go down to the border and they work in the detention camps, and they come back to New York and work with various immigration and organizations here. So those are just two examples, and this grant is going to enable Barnard to really grow those types of learning experiences for here in New York City. So how the college engages with the social issues of the time, particularly around immigration, economics, is something that I think this grant we're going to see over the next 6 years a lot of development in.
Hi. I'm Amy Veltman, class of '89, and my question is, I'm so excited that you're here and that the college is elevating diversity, equity, and inclusion as an issue on campus. For people who are from who have dominant identities, and for people who are from privileged backgrounds where equity is not something maybe naturally on their radar, are there any things that are not opt-in that are being done to address kind of making the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion permeate the institution, not just for people who are eligible for Pell Grants or, for people who might not have ever given these ideas a thought?
I think that question of kind of how do we get everybody to run into diversity, equity, inclusion and think about it and understand it. I'm right now in the process of trying to look more closely, Barnard's Foundations curriculum. I think it's something in terms of how it's been restructured to really look at, because everybody at Barnard has to take a course called Thinking About Social Difference. And in those courses, when you look at the description of the course and what the course seeks to do, this is really what those courses seek to do, is they seek to have students think about social inequality. They want students in those courses to think about the dynamics of race, gender, religion, difference. So I have to kind of dig deeper to figure out, so all students touch that course. What are they getting from that course, right? Are they getting what we want them to get, which is shifting their perspectives or deepening their perspectives or helping them think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a more complex way, helping them to think about their role. So I think actually Barnard's curriculum, when I look at it, there are so many pockets and robust pockets of really thinking about intersectionality and difference in many, many different ways. So there's thinking about global inquiry. I think I might get the title wrong, and local. So they're really being asked to look at the world in this with these kinds of lenses. Again, what it's doing, this is kind of a question that many institutions are asking in terms of the metrics of, are we developing deeper empathy, right? So I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about as well, is we're taking these academic courses, but when we look at some of the challenges on college campuses around speaking across difference, very polarized viewpoints, there's also this question of how the inability to listen to the other is connected to a lack of empathy or a lack of understanding or needing to deepen how we have empathic conversation. So it's something that there's a lot of examples of how campuses do this right now. I'm trying to look for some examples that I think that would fit here, but also to begin to maybe more deeply assess in the curriculum, what is the curriculum doing? Because it might be already doing something that we're not 100% clear that it is.
Rhonda Small, class of '72. I'm really glad to hear about this Feel Well, Do Well initiative and the awareness of mental health among students on campus. And I was wondering, there's a rumor that there are a lot of, this is a more difficult issue to raise, that there are a lot of, that Columbia has a high rate of sexual assault accusations and suits against it. And I was wondering how, with a more open dorm policy on Barnard's campus, how Barnard prepares and protects its students, and if there are any incidents, how it can protect its students afterwards and help the student deal with the trauma.
So I think through the Furman and Health Services, there is a ongoing series around sexual health that includes understanding intimate partner violence, that helps students through the peer health educators on campus, begins to equip those students as well to understand how to practice allyship and bystander. So if they encounter a peer who has been assaulted in any way, they know what to do. It's also developing, we do Title IX, and the Equity Office does trainings for all faculty and staff. Those are mandated trainings around what it means to be a mandated reporter. And if a student is disclosing that something has occurred to them, they know where to go. So that is actually part of the Feel Well, Do Well, is making sure that people also know the protocols and the compliance parts, and also know what to do. So there is, and has been actually, a very long-standing program within health services and the Furman Counseling Center around this broad umbrella of what we describe as sexual health. They do, a series on healthy relationships. So there's a broad, I think, network and attention paid through both the Health Services and Counseling Center and the Title IX and Equity Office that's paid to these topics on college campuses right now, and something that I think Barnard does and is doing very well. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I think that might be all the time we have for questions. So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you all for being here.
And just as a quick aside, if you do have ideas or programs, or please feel free to email me. I'd love to hear from all of you about what you're thinking. So thanks again.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Jyoti.